Debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by advising the House that I'll be splitting my time with the member for Winnipeg North. I'm joining you here from my riding of Scarborough Rouge Park on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm honored to speak here today on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It is a day marked by September 30th, which we've traditionally marked as Orange Shirt Day. And I want to thank the many survivors and family members who've taught me so much about residential schools over the years, and I'm particularly honored to work with colleagues such as the member for the Northwest Territories, who himself is a survivor, and former member of Parliament Romeo Sagnash, and former member MP Jolibois, who was the initial sponsor of this bill. And I'm also inspired by the work of so many of my colleagues here, including the member for Winnipeg Centre and my good friend from Sydney, Victoria, and I'm also inspired by the words of the member for Fredericton and the member for North Island, Powell River, members representing the many different parties within our House. Let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, this day is to respect, honor, and reflect on the enormous lives lost in the generations of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, whose lives have been forever changed. It's equally to recognize the enormous resilience of the survivors and their families. It is about education, as many have said, but it is not about Indigenous people educating non-Indigenous people about what's happened with residential schools and the many other oppressive things that have happened in this country since 1867 and beyond. It is about Canadians learning and taking initiative to understand what this day marks. This is not about re-victimizing those who have enormous pain, enormous struggles to overcome, and intergenerational trauma that cannot be erased overnight. And I always say when I speak about reconciliation, I often qualify this term because I know it's a term that's used quite regularly. It's used by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the 94 calls to action. And it's a term that our government uses quite regularly. But as someone who has worked on the issue of reconciliation, I can tell you it is not one where those who are affected, those who are victimized, need to reconcile. It is about those who perpetrated these atrocities who need to come forward and make sure the conditions are there for reconciliation. As far as we have a survivor, as far as we have a child of a survivor who is directly impacted by residential schools, it will be very difficult to reconcile. As long as those lives continue to be, in terms of every social economic measure, not at par with non-Indigenous people, the conditions will not be there for reconciliation to take shape. So as much as we mark this day, as much as this day is an important and significant day, it is a day for Canadians to recommit and double down on the need for reconciliation to take place, the need for all of the social and social determinants of health to be rectified, and to ensure that we have a proper plan and path forward to ensure that true equality can take shape in Canada. And I know a number of questions were posed about the Indian Act itself, and I can categorically say that it is a deeply flawed and deeply racist act that continues to subjugate First Nations people from coast to coast to coast in a very colonial setting. I don't know how else to say it. It is a deeply racist piece of legislation. sadly, it is one of those pieces of legislation that cannot be just undone, as it is. It has taken generations to put together, and in many ways to be able to address some of the issues within Indigenous and First Nations communities. It is important that the journey that we're on towards a nation-to-nation relationship where First Nations communities and nations and peoples can actually negotiate and establish their own governance, their own self-determination over very basic things and very complex things, including land, including resources, including language, including justice, including culture. Until we do that, it will be too simplistic of a solution just to say we're going to eliminate the Indian Act altogether. It is one of those acts, as the member for Sydney Victoria had said, and he said it quite well. It is an act that unfortunately is not ready to be taken down yet, but that is where we need to end up. And let me speak to more on this day itself. As the Parliamentary Secretary previously, who was working on this file, we heard from so many different people on the need for this day. I think there was a lot of discussion. The TRC call to action number 80 did not specify September 30th, but it definitely called for a day that would mark this important recognition of residential schools. And in fact, September 30th rather, became the natural fit, and that is almost a consensus that we received from many different individuals and survivors and leaders and communities and from people of all walks of life, Indigenous people of all walks of life. And it was that kind of consensus, I think, that allowed us to move forward on this day. But it is also something that is not the end. In fact, it is a beginning. So I think some have suggested that yes, we establish this day and we go away. No, it is in fact the beginning, I think, of a longer journey, a longer discussion, and a more elaborate conversations as to how this should be marked in each and every community. In Scarborough Rouge Park and places like the GTA, there are very few resources that are available, even though we have very large populations of urban Indigenous people. We have very few resources to be able to educate, and I think this is where our school boards need to come in, our provinces need to come in. And similar to Remembrance Day, where there is an actual event at schools, because it's in Ontario, at least, it's not a provincial holiday. This should be a day where people are able to market locally, are able to speak about it. Young people are able to understand and to learn from each other and from their teachers on this experience. I'm someone who went to school in Canada since I was in grade 4, and I can tell you I did not learn about this until well into my university years, and even then I would say that it was insufficient. So I think that learning and that education needs to take place on a day like this, where it is not a holiday. It won't be a holiday in many of the provinces until they bring legislation, but it will allow schools to mark the day and to be able to observe it in a very poignant manner. This statutory holiday will ensure that public commemoration of the tragic and painful history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. And throughout the witness testimony for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, commissioners heard from many organizations and groups that highlighted the importance and value of the day to commemorate. They talked about the need to have a day to reflect the harm that has been historically inflicted on First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And I hope that this House is able to adopt this. I do want to note that there are many calls to action. In fact, almost 80% of the calls to action under the sole responsibility of the federal government or shared responsibility of the provinces have been completed or are well underway. And this is one of those items. And I want to just make note that call to action number 50, which is calling on the Pope to apologize on behalf of the actions of the Catholic Church, is something that I think may gain traction given the developments of the Pope this week alone on same-sex marriage. So I'm hoping that we are able to work together as faith groups, as governments, as Indigenous people to advance reconciliation in Canada, and I hope to see this legislation pass as soon as possible.